And joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean and her son, Harry Cunnane, co-authors of Under Our Roof. It's a memoir about Harry's opioid addiction and his battle for recovery, a successful battle. Have spiked during the pandemic, and you know, even before the pandemic, how difficult this is for families. We just saw this grieving mother. Certainly the stress of the pandemic adding to this. Tell me about your family story.
Well, it's a staggering story that's taking place across the country. My heart goes out to that mom and those children. On average, 220 people die every single day. So that same heartbreak is being replicated every single day in this country in hundreds of families. Harry and I were asked to write this book, frankly, by my older son. He thought we might have a story to tell. In the years of our struggle, me trying to figure out what was going on with Harry, what was going wrong with Harry as his affect changed, as his friends changed, and as his health deteriorated, and him deceiving and covering and as he slipped farther and farther into addiction. So we wrote the book to hope that somebody might see themselves in us, and more importantly, that somebody might see themselves in the chance and the hope and the joy of recovery. It's Harry's story that I'm very proud of.
And Harry, you've been 8 years, in recovery. You're now working at the rehab center that you had gone to. But take us back to those years when you were covering up, you were struggling, and I guess you were hoping your parents were not aware. How did you come to the realization that they were there to help you?
So it all really came together in a very low moment for me. I had been stealing from my family and was caught. But before that particular incident, there were so many times that I tried on my own to stop using, to cut back, to manage and control what was going on. And I just found myself incapable before I had the opportunity to receive treatment, to get the help that I needed in order to really build a foundation and find my way into long-term recovery.
And Harry, you write about your confrontation with your mother. You write, I remember my mom crying as she told me what she'd discovered. I remember not being able to get a word out, only tears, but the fear of exposure was accompanied by a new feeling. For the first time, the truth seemed safer than telling another lie. So tell us about your passage through rehab and how they've come to help you.
So I think that, particular segment of the book really highlights some of the stigma that's felt, not just on the individual who's dealing with a substance use disorder, but on the entire family. It holds a lot of people back from reaching out and asking for help. And I didn't know what recovery might look like. When I walked into treatment, I had no idea what to expect. I hoped that, I would be safely detoxed and, have an opportunity to move forward. But I had no idea the potential and the opportunity and the possibilities that could be realized through recovery. So I was very fortunate to go to an incredible treatment center and really have the time for long-term treatment, which I think so many more people need. And it's an issue that really is a challenge for many who are seeking treatment at this time, depending on, resources and insurance and Medicaid and many other factors. How much time we're willing to give someone in treatment is a really, really important thing that we need to look at.
And Congresswoman, you and Harry are also focusing on the equity issues, because if you were not a comfortable white family with parents able to help, that Harry could have been caught up in the criminal justice system.
That was so clear to us in the run-up to discovering what was wrong with him, and then, of course, as he went into treatment. When we visited, and parents are encouraged to be a part of recovery and come, for example, for a weekend and learn more about this. So many of the young people and so many people of color are caught up in the criminal justice system and then don't get this opportunity for help. We're very keenly aware that but for the color of his skin, but for his socioeconomic status and maybe the address on his license, he would have had a very different story. We went and visited Karen Bramhall Prison in Philadelphia, and almost unspoken, we sort of said to each other, this is a prison that could have been your own. If society were to treat him the same way that society treats those who don't enjoy white privilege. But part of what we want to say is the disease doesn't recognize white privilege, and society needs to take those lenses off and say, how do we deal with people who are caught up in a disease of addiction? We should not criminalize the behavior. We should actually get them treatment.
And that brings me to the whole issue of the stigma, Harry, because people have to fight against that in order to acknowledge that they need help, and families have to fight the stigma to realize that this is just a disease like other diseases and you need help.
Absolutely. And, for us in writing this book, Under Our Roof, we really wanted to share the whole story, the full picture of what it looks like, the horrors of active addiction and the joys of recovery. As one story, there's so many out there. They can look very different. There's many pathways to recovery. But we wanted to share our story because that's what we have as an opportunity and a platform, in hopes that maybe others feel comfortable reaching out and asking for help. And what we've seen so far in the past couple of weeks since the book came out has been an overwhelming outpouring of people who have reached out and said, hey, this is how I was impacted. And there's so many out there. It's such a common issue throughout this country. And we just want to remind people that it is a disease. It's not that, they're a bad person, but most importantly, it's a treatable disease. And we need to continue to focus on that and dealing with it medically and not with the criminal justice system.
Well, you are such an extraordinary example. And Congresswoman, you have a position of privilege. You can affect policy on criminal justice reform, on health policy. Surely you know how to get things done.
Well, I hope I can. And I have to admit to you, when we were going through this, I thought we were a very ordinary family. I'm sure people might look at us now and say it's different because it was under their roof, a roof of greater privilege. But we are an ordinary American family. I do have the absolute privilege of being able to talk about and fight for policy changes. So, for example, one of the reasons we wrote this book was to say, if we can tell you about this problem in our house, maybe you can see yourself. I have introduced legislation around opioid addiction, one to stop the stigma, another to deal with healthcare. This needs to be mainstream healthcare, not just for the very few or the privileged. It needs to be healthcare for all, even in the event of recurrence. So there's so much we can do in terms of criminal justice reform, healthcare reform, and ending the stigma.
And we've less than a minute, but Harry, what's your message to those still struggling with addiction?
That you're not alone and that recovery is possible. I know for me in the darkest moments, I couldn't see that and I, didn't believe it, but it is out there. From someone who didn't believe it, who has now experienced it, I'm here to say that recovery truly is possible. And just to remind people that recovery can look very different. There's many pathways. And the last thing I'd say is just to highlight that it's not just opioid, the opioid epidemic, it's substance use disorder as a whole. We've seen through this pandemic really on the rise in a very, very scary way. So if you're out there and you're struggling, reach out for help. And you may be able to hopefully find the joy that I have found through recovery.
Well, thanks to both of you for your courage, for everything you're doing. The book is Under Our Roof. Congresswoman Madeleine Dean and her son, Harry Cunnane. And our great thanks to you for doing this.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.